G'day Year 11 and welcome to your first ever YouTube lesson and lesson of business studies. Hope you're going to enjoy. Now, with Year 11 we have three topics. 1, 2, 3. The first one which we're going to be looking at today is the nature of business. Second topic that you guys will be taking a look at is business management and how managers can effectively manage a business. And the last one we look at in Year 11 is called business planning. And we do a business plan as part of that. Now, in Year 12, you'll take a look at 4 topics. That is marketing, operations, finance, and human resources. Okay. Now, you're probably aware from, your junior studies in Year 9 and 10 about the syllabus and about this concept of students learn to and students learn about. The content that I'm going to explicitly go through and teach is the students learn about. Going through and doing that, it's the fact that you will need to then be able to do certain things. And that's where the students learn to part of the syllabus comes in. But if you take a look at the end of your booklets that I've given you, I've also looked at each of the students learn to and provided answers to that as well. Now, we're going to look at the syllabus today of that very first topic for Year 11, nature of business. So under the students learn to, which often for your yearly or preliminary exam can be short answer or essay questions, these are the 7 different students learn to that you'll need to be able to understand and to be able to answer. Some lend themselves more to a short answer question, whereas some are very good essay questions. Okay, the first one is to discuss the global expansion of one Australian business. And we take a look at Billabong in terms of my notes and how it's expanded from just being a domestic company to a large overseas company. The second syllabus dot point for students learn to is to discuss the expansion into Australia of one global business. And we look at Virgin Australia, so this international business, and how it's moved into Australia. Now, the third dot point is explain how changes in external influences have contributed to the growth of tertiary, quaternary, and quinary industries in Australia. All right, the next student learn to is identify problems that arise for stakeholders. These are people who have an interest in a business when companies go into liquidation. That means that they're not able to make their repayments and therefore they need to liquefy their assets to turn it from the assets they have into cash to pay their debts. Right, the last 3 students learn to that we'll be looking at are distinguish, tell me the difference, between the different types of businesses. The second last student learn to, the penultimate one, identify actual businesses at different stages in the business life cycle. And we're going to look more at the business life cycle. We'll look here at establishment, then growth, then maturity, like myself, very mature, and then we look at post-maturity, in renewal, steady state, or decline. And we'll look at businesses as case studies for each of these life cycles. And the last student learn to, you're going to need to be able to do at the end of this first topic, is to outline possible business strategies that are appropriate for different stages in the business life cycle. Now, as I said, these are things that when we finish teaching you, the students learn about, you need to be able to do, hence students learn to. Now, in terms of the explicit content we're going to be going through in class, first thing is the role of business. That's the first major subheading. And then we take a look under that in terms of the syllabus dot point you need to know, which is, we're going to look at this next YouTube lesson, the nature of business. What's business there to do? The nature, its role, its job. And its nature, its role, its job is to produce goods and or services. Like I'm doing now. My job, the nature of me as a teacher, is to provide you with top-notch, high-quality education. No, you cannot get a refund. Also, business is there to provide profit, employment, provide incomes for workers, provide choice and innovation, to be able to provide a person who's interested in setting up a business, this entrepreneurship ability. And we look at this notion of risk versus reward. Also, businesses there to provide wealth, improve the quality of life of all customers, not just the business owners. Now, the next subtopic under this major first syllabus topic of nature of business is the types of business. And we want to classify business into certain categories. And we've got things such as size. So a business can be small, medium, or large. And you'll see this thing called SMEs, stands for small to medium enterprises. And that's the focus largely in Year 11. Year 12 looks at much larger companies in general. But that's one way to classify, categorize a business, the size. Now, I wish in the syllabus it said something called scale, but the next little dot point under classification of business is really scale. Is a business local, the local level, like the local council? Is it a national company like, say, Woolworths? Or is it an international, a global business? And generally you'll see a connection between global businesses being large businesses and local businesses being small in size. Not always, but usually. Now, the next way to classify a business is called industry or industry sector. We've got primary industry, which is like farming and mining. We've got the secondary industry, which is often manufacturing. We've got the tertiary industry, which is generally the service-based industry. Now, the tertiary industry is so large, especially in Australia, that it's divided into two different options, two parts. Tertiary, two parts. Quaternary and quinary. And we'll look at the difference between those two later on in future lessons and YouTube clips. The final way to classify a business, the last one, is a legal structure. Okay, and we take a look at the different ways a business can be set up in terms of the legalities, and these include things like being a sole trader, just the one owner. You can have a crap load of workers, but just only one owner is a sole trader. And there's pros and cons of these different legal structures you might choose. You can have partnerships, you can have a private company or a public company, and we'll take a look at the difference between being incorporated, which means being a company, and just being a business, not a company. There's also another way to classify a business under legal structure, and that can be a government-owned business or a GBE. In the syllabus, it's called a government enterprise. Now, the last dot point under the types of businesses we see is factors influencing choice of legal structure. Now, these are the things, the factors are things or factors that influence, that have an impact on me as an owner and which structure I choose. I'm going to start up a tuition business, and why wouldn't I? Skills. So, which one will I choose? Sole trader? The legal structure? What about a public company? Partnership? Which do I choose and why? And there's three factors that influence which choice you make. The first one is the size. Small businesses tend to be sole traders. Large size businesses, in terms of the size, tend to be public or maybe private companies. Ownership. That's about control. Sole traders have 100% ownership, 100% control. You own that business yourself. Public companies, hell, I own public companies. I own about 1 billionth of Telstra. So I have very little control and very little ownership. But that's okay. I want to be a silent partner. So the level of control you want or ownership of the business, really the same thing, determines which structure you might pick. The last factor influencing legal structure is finance. How does this sort of work? Well, finance is about getting coin, cashola from the old bank or NBFIs. We'll talk about that later. But it's easy to get a loan to obtain finance if you're a public company. Then on the other end of the spectrum, in terms of legal structure, which is a sole trader. Why? I'm one dude, or well, I'm not one chick, but one dude or one lady owning a particular business as a sole trader. If they become sick or whatever may well happen, then it's risky for a bank to lend that one person a big sum of money. Whereas if you've got billions of owners as you do with public companies, then one person becomes sick, who gives a crap? It doesn't matter. You're able to have all those other owners and there's no problems. All right, the next subtopic of this first topic, nature of business, is influences in the business environment. What things can impact, influence the business environment? There's two main influences. You have external influences and internal influences. And there's also this influence of stakeholders. And kids often get stakeholders and shareholders mixed up. They're not the same. Shareholders are just one example of a stakeholder. But in terms of external influences, these are influences on a business that the business has no or generally little control over. So the things that impact, influence, have an effect on the business that the owner cannot control or has very little control over. Some examples include the economy, economic cycle, financial, geographic, social, legal, political, institutional, technological, competitive situation, and the last external influence are markets or the marketplaces. And we'll go through each of these in far more depth in future lessons and YouTube clips. Now, I talked about external. There's also internal influences. And like it sounds, internal, inside, the business has a high degree, a crap load, if you will, of control over it. What are some internal influences, impacts on a business? The product that the business makes, where they choose to locate the business, the owner. They get to choose, to a large degree, resources and how they use them, the management, and the business culture that the business has. Now, the last major influence in terms of this big nature of business topic is stakeholders or are stakeholders. Now, stakeholders are anyone who has an interest in a business. So there's lots of different stakeholders. Employees, the workers. Employers, the managers and potentially the owners. Society does, the government does, a whole range of people, shareholders, also have an influence in the business and how it runs. We'll look at that in future lessons. All right, the last subtopic of this major topic, nature of business, that we will look at is business growth and decline. And we look at the stages of the business life cycle. I mentioned a little bit earlier on, the business life cycle, I teach you this in the Students Learn About, then you should, hopefully, if you're good kids, that's a question you're going to ask yourself, you should be able to answer this with the Student Learn 2 questions. Now, what are the stages of the business life cycle? How many are there? Have a guess. If you said 3, then you're not doing well. There's 4. There's establishment, growth, maturity, and post-maturity. Establishment is the setting up of the business. It's a rough time. Growth is when you see huge number of customers come in. And we take a look next at maturity, when sales start to plateau, level out. Following that, we start to take a look at the post-maturity stage, and that can have 3 components itself. Does the business start to reinvigorate itself, reinvent itself, and kick on again, as Apple did back when Steve Jobs got re-employed before he carked it? Or we can have steady state, where it stays in terms of post-maturity, steady state, or we can have decline in the post-maturity stage, where it starts to decline sales, and then it may even cease to exist. All right, the third last dot point we have, and it's under this business growth and decline subheading, is responding to challenges at each stage of the business life cycle. So we look at each of these stages and we look at the challenges, the problems that a business faces at each of these 4 stages. And then how would a business successfully respond to each of these changes? So that's all part of it. These 2 dot points are all part of the one idea or concept. Right, the second last dot point for this particular major topic is factors that can contribute to business decline. What things lead to success for a business and what things lead to decline in a business and a business unfortunately ceasing to exist. Now, depending on the textbook you look at, many say that within the first 5 years of a business being in existence, how many businesses cease to exist? Have a think about it. What do you think? If you said 10, 20%, way wrong. It's in excess of 50%. Most textbooks talk about within 5 years, 70% of businesses no longer exist. And that's because they haven't been able to do things properly. And it's also a difficult thing to set up a business. And we'll look at proper business planning at the end of year 11. Now, the last dot point we'll look at today is voluntary and involuntary cessation. Okay, and this notion of liquidation. Now, we're talking about cessation is ending a business. And voluntary is you choose as an owner to end the business. Involuntary means you don't get a choice. Your business was kind of crap and no one wanted to buy from it. There's other things too, okay, but there's no choice and the business itself ends because a lack of your choice. It's forced upon you. All right, guys, see you later.